Does the person you are with encourage you to read? You have to ask, what does he bring for me? Roses or books? If someone has a stake in making you better, that person will push you towards books. Books are what we all need. Minal is asking, can the shadow be our ego? Whose ego? Whose shadow? Use your questions and you will come to yourself. Look at your questions. Your questions are the shadow. Look at your shadow if you don't have a mirror and you will know something about yourself. You are saying, our ego. Whose ego? Your question betrays the assumption that you consider yourself as somebody different from the ego. That's why you are saying, my ego. Don't say my ego, say me ego. There is nothing called my ego. You are not the owner or the master of the ego. You are the ego. You are the ego and the world is the shadow. The world means everything. Thoughts, ideas, views, ideologies, opinions, memories, knowledge, worldview. All that is perceivable through the senses, all that which can be touched, seen, heard, smelled. That is the world. All that which can be contained in the consciousness is the world. All that which you can think of is the world. All that which can be given a name is the world. That is the shadow. The ego means I. You are saying my ego. You are saying my I. You are saying, in other words, I is I. My me. I is I. The ego literally means I. You are saying my I? Then who are you? You are that I. You are that ego. But it is humiliating to identify with the ego. Rather, it is humiliating when your identification with the ego is exposed. You want to act as someone who is a little separate from the ego, who uses the ego, who controls the ego, who manipulates and deploys the ego. Sorry, sir, that is not the case. You do not control and deploy your ego. Your ego is all over you. It has seeped right to your core. So you are the ego. If there is one party that is using the other, if that is the language that you want to use, then it is the ego that is using you. You are not using the ego. Actually, nobody is using anybody because the two are one. But if you want to still stand by that artificial separation, then it is more accurate to say that you are the ego's I. It is not as if you can say my ego. The ego should say my I. The ego should claim the ownership. Look at your life. Do you really control the ego? Even the thought of control comes from the ego. So how would you control the ego? Who else wants to control anybody? The very desire to control is ego. So even when you say that I control the ego, it is the ego in action. You are not the owner of the ego. I know that hurts the ego. You are so identified with the ego that even when you say it hurts me, it is actually the ego that is being hurt. The ego is a piece of sun that has gone astray. So it is no more resplendent on its own. It now is dependent on external light. The ego is a piece of the sun itself that has come apart. The sun is immense. The sun is a symbol of the infinite. A little finite piece drops out. That is the ego. A piece of the sun that is no more close to the sun. Had it been there, up with the sun, it would have had light of its own. Now it requires the light of the sun. And even when it receives the light of the sun, it receives that light along with the shadow. You see, the sun has so much light, but no shadows. But when that same light of the sun falls upon you, there is a shadow. That is the punishment of being small. That is the punishment of being small. As a small one, even when you receive light, it creates a shadow. When the small one receives even light, it results in shadow. That is the punishment